Hello, I'm Brian Vale. From an early age, I came to understand one important thing. The greatest value in life is not what you can hold in your hand, but what is hidden inside the human mind. More than once, I was told that every person carries a powerful inner source of energy. But many people continue living in lack, not because they have no strength, and not because life gave them less than others, but because they never learn how to use what is already built into them. In this video, I want to share a deep piece of life wisdom, one that modern knowledge about the brain increasingly seems to support. We're going to talk about how just a few minutes before your head touches the pillow can begin to change the direction of your entire life. You'll understand why hard work, by itself, does not always bring the results people hope for. And you'll see how the subconscious mind can become your strongest ally, continuing to work toward your goals while you sleep peacefully. This is a conversation about a method of inner reset, a way of replacing old fear and limitation with new possibility and greater abundance. Imagine this. Sometimes the key to the deepest changes in your life can be just 2 words. That sounds almost too simple to matter. But very often, real power is hidden inside things that seem simple on the surface. I'll help you choose those words, and I'll explain how to use them the right way so that the process of change can actually begin. But pay close attention. There is one final detail, and without it, this practice will not bring a real result. I'll reveal that part only at the very end of our conversation, because some things cannot be understood in a rush, and the final idea is the one that gives everything else its foundation. The first practice is clearing the heart's old ledger. Resentment is not just a passing flash of anger. It is a heavy emotional burden, and over time it can block the way for any real growth, peace, or abundance in your life. When you keep holding on to bitterness toward another person, you tie yourself to the past by your own hand. You keep making your inner world return to those same painful moments again and again, even when the event itself is already over. And while that is happening, your subconscious receives a destructive instruction. It hears, "Give me more pain, more hurt, more situations like this." That is why people who protect their old grievances for years so often feel trapped in the same cycle. The same disappointment, the same heaviness, the same sense of emotional exhaustion, inner debt, and life that never fully opens up. Real forgiveness is not a gift to the person who hurt you. It is an act of release for yourself. When you let go of old wounds, you begin clearing out your inner space. You remove what has been sitting there for too long, and in that cleared space, something new can finally enter. New energy, new movement, new opportunities, and the kind of events that can bring lightness and forward motion back into your life. This practice matters any time you feel that the weight of the past is still sitting inside you, but it becomes especially important in those quiet minutes before sleep, because while you sleep, your subconscious keeps working with the state you leave it in. It will work either with conflict, resentment, and inner debt, or with peace, clarity, and readiness for something better. There was a time when I was still very young and just starting my first business. Someone I trusted treated me deeply unfairly and left me with nothing. For days, I could think of almost nothing else. My mind kept circling around the same thing: my anger, my sense of betrayal, and my need to somehow restore justice. Then I heard an idea that stayed with me for life. Imagine that your heart is a kind of ledger, a place where you keep the names of everyone who owes you something. And as long as you spend your energy tracking those old accounts, checking those entries, and waiting for repayment, you leave no room to write a new chapter there about your own future, your own work, or your own success. That thought landed hard. I realized that my anger was still life energy. It was the same energy I could have used to build something new, but instead I was giving it to the past. I was feeding what had hurt me and starving what could still grow. So that night, before I fell asleep, I closed my eyes and imagined crossing every name out of that inner ledger. I let those people go their own way, and I told myself that I was ready to stop guarding old pain and open the door to something new. And strangely enough, only 3 days later, a new opportunity came into my life. It did not just cover what I had lost. It brought back far more than I expected. That was the moment I truly understood something important. As long as the heart is busy with old accounts, it has no room for new treasure. The second practice is the alliance between pen and paper. Many people carry dreams inside them for years, yet never allow those dreams to become anything more than blurred images in the mind. And very often, one of the deepest reasons for that is a hidden feeling that they are simply not worthy of anything better. They look at someone else's comfort, someone else's health, someone else's beautiful and stable life, and quietly assume that all of it belongs to other people, not to them. But that feeling is not the truth. It is an old program, something that settled deep inside long ago. And if you want to begin breaking that program, you have to move a desire out of the world of vague thought and into the world of reality. That is exactly why this practice matters. It creates an alliance between pen and paper. When you write something down by hand, a desire stops being a vague fantasy. Every word asks for attention. Every line asks for intention. And in that moment, the subconscious no longer treats what you want as a passing wish or an empty daydream. It begins to register it as a clear signal, a concrete instruction, the beginning of form. There is something powerful about that shift. A thought that stays in your head can keep floating for years, but once it reaches the page, it becomes heavier. It becomes more real. It begins to take up space in your life, and that changes the way your inner world responds to it. Someone from my early life comes to mind here, a man named Leonard. He was an exceptional watchmaker, the kind of person who could restore mechanisms that other people had already given up on. His hands were precise, his eye was sharp, and his level of skill was obvious to anyone who paid attention. But despite that, he spent most of his life working in a small, dark workshop on the edge of town, because deep down, he did not believe he deserved anything more. Whenever people asked him why he did not open a proper workshop in a better part of the city, he would lower his eyes and say the same thing. "Who am I to reach for that? This is enough for me." And in that answer, you could hear the whole program. Not laziness, not lack of talent. A quiet conviction that a better life belonged to other people. One day, he was given an empty notebook and a simple instruction. Every evening, before turning out the light, he had to write one sentence by hand. "I am the best craftsman in this city, and I deserve to work in the light of day." At first, even writing those words felt unnatural to him. His hand shook. His inner voice kept insisting that he was lying to himself, that this was childish, that it meant nothing. But he kept going. After a while, he began writing with more steadiness. Then he started adding detail. He described the workshop he wanted, how much light it had, how the tools were arranged, what kind of people came through the door, what it felt like to do his work in a place that matched the quality of his gift. About a month later, even his presence had changed. There was more calm in him, more certainty, more self-respect. And not long after that, a wealthy man came to him with a difficult job, one that others had failed to solve. Leonard handled it beautifully, and what followed was not just payment for one successful piece of work. It was an offer to begin a professional partnership, one that opened the real possibility of eventually having that bright workshop he had already described so many times in his notebook. That is when something became impossible to ignore. Until a person inwardly recognizes their right to something better, even on paper, that future still feels foreign to them. Handwriting is a way of telling the subconscious, "I am here, I am real, I am ready, and I am allowed to want more." Sometimes 5 honest minutes with a pen can do more than years of silent wishing. The third practice is dialogue with the body. One of the most dangerous programs a person can carry for years is the belief that health no longer truly belongs to them. People get used to their pain. They start treating weakness, fatigue, and chronic discomfort as part of who they are. Little by little, they stop seeing those things as temporary states and begin accepting them as their identity. And that is where the trap begins. The body is not a fixed structure. It is always changing. It is always renewing itself. Old cells leave, new cells take their place. So when illness keeps holding on inside the body, the issue is not always only physical. Very often, it is also tied to the inner message a person keeps repeating through thought, language, attention, and expectation. When you constantly focus on symptoms, when you keep repeating that your body is weak, your joints are failing, your heart is fragile, or your strength is gone, the subconscious begins to register that as a stable command. What may have started as a condition slowly becomes a reinforced identity. And the more often a person speaks to themselves through illness, the more deeply that state settles into their reality. The purpose of this practice is to stop fighting the body from the inside. Instead of treating it like an enemy that betrayed you, you begin to relate to it as a living system that is still trying to serve you. That shift matters. And it matters even more before sleep, when conscious resistance begins to soften and the subconscious becomes especially open to suggestion. In those moments, a person can give the inner world a new instruction, not one of decline, but one of repair, strength, and renewal. There was a man I once knew named Albert. He was a gifted tailor, careful, exact, with a rare feel for shape, fabric, and detail. But by the time he reached 60, he had visibly declined. His joints hurt constantly, his back had bent, and his eyesight was getting worse. He went from doctor to doctor, but deep down he had already accepted the idea that his time had passed. He spoke about his body as if it were finished, as if all that remained was to endure it. One day I saw him struggling just to thread a needle, and in that moment it became obvious how deeply that inner surrender had taken hold. So I said something simple to him. You keep speaking to your body like it has betrayed you, yet it is still working for you every day. Your cells hear the way you describe them. They hear that you call them weak, worn out, and finished, and they keep responding to that command. I asked him to try something different. Every evening before sleep I told him, close your eyes and speak to your body with gratitude. Do not call your knees ruined. Do not keep repeating that your body is broken. Thank it for carrying you this far. And begin giving it a new inner message: renewal, strength, restoration. I asked him to choose 2 words for that practice. He chose strength and restoration. At first, it all felt ridiculous to him. His inner voice mocked the whole thing. It told him he was too old, too worn down, too far gone for any of this to matter. But Albert was stubborn, and he kept going. Night after night, he repeated those 2 words. He imagined the old message losing its hold. He imagined his body taking in a different instruction. He stopped relating to himself as someone permanently defeated by decline and began, little by little, to act like someone returning to life. Within a few months, the change became too visible to ignore. When I saw him again, his posture was straighter, his walk was steadier, and there was life in his eyes that had not been there before. He told me himself that something had shifted the moment he stopped arguing with his body and started working with it. That experience stayed with me. The subconscious does not debate what you keep feeding it. It does not stop to ask whether you deserve health or not. It keeps responding to the language, the attention, and the identity you give it. And that is why a person should never quietly agree with an inner sentence of decline. Healing is not only about treatment. It is also about the way you speak to your body every single day. The 4th practice is the sieve of true desires. At some point, almost every person looks back and realizes that too much of life was spent chasing things they never truly needed. Very often, we do not move toward what is deeply ours. We move toward what looks impressive, respectable, correct, or socially approved. And one of the deepest reasons for that confusion is a hidden feeling of unworthiness. A person looks at someone else's success and quietly assumes that real happiness, freedom, and fullness of life belong to other people, but not to them. That is exactly why it becomes so important to separate genuine desire from borrowed desire. This practice helps you recognize what you truly want and what was planted in you by family, school, social expectation, status, image, or the need to be approved of. The subconscious works most powerfully only when it receives a living, sincere signal. If you are trying to move toward a goal that does not really belong to you, there will always be resistance inside. You can repeat the right words about success and abundance for years, but if the desire itself is borrowed, the inner energy to realize it will never fully gather behind it. That is what the sieve of true desires is for. It helps you filter out what is not really yours so that what remains is alive. When a person finally comes into contact with a real desire, it no longer feels like an obligation or a polished idea or something that only sounds good on the surface. It begins to feel warm. It begins to feel personal. It begins to sound like something inside you has finally told the truth. And that is the moment when the subconscious stops resisting and starts moving in the same direction as you. This practice becomes especially important when life feels stuck, even though you are trying hard. When you work a lot, push yourself constantly, and still feel inwardly empty, that is often a sign that you are living by a script that was never truly your own. And in that kind of moment, what you need is not another burst of effort. What you need is an honest re-examination of what you are living for and what kind of life you are actually trying to build. There was a woman in my life named Maria, a relative of mine. She was a successful corporate lawyer, held a high position, lived in a beautiful apartment, and, from the outside, looked like someone who had done everything right. But behind that polished image, something very different was happening. Every evening she came home completely drained. And one day, she admitted to me that she felt less like the owner of her own life and more like someone who had spent years performing a role in someone else's play. Maria had learned to believe that the only life worth respecting was the one that looked impressive from the outside. She did not allow herself to take her real desires seriously. She was drawn to plants, gardens, living spaces, beauty, design, and the quiet joy of creating something alive. But to her, all of that seemed too soft, too small, too unserious for a woman with her status and education. She looked at her real desires as if they were somehow beneath the kind of life she was supposed to live. So I предложил something simple, but deeply honest. I asked her to take a notebook and write a long list of everything she would want to have, do, experience, or create, without editing it, without judging it, and without trying to sound reasonable. Just write. Let the list become long enough that the surface answers run out, and once the list was there, the real work began. She started going through it slowly, not just with her eyes, but with her full inner response. Not asking, "Does this make sense?" but asking, "Does this feel alive?" She was trying to notice where there was warmth, where there was energy, where there was quiet joy, and where there was only habit, pressure, and old conditioning. Very quickly, it became obvious that a large part of the list was made of borrowed ambitions, status symbols, prestigious purchases, things that looked good from the outside but left her cold inside. And then she reached one line that changed everything. It was the idea of creating her own garden of rare plants. The moment she read it, something in her softened. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel tired. She felt a deep, quiet joy. That was the moment she found the real seed. That same evening, Maria chose 2 words for her nightly practice: beauty and creation. She began repeating them before sleep, not while imagining some vague version of success, but while seeing herself with soil on her hands, breathing in the smell of plants after rain, feeling calm, absorbed, and deeply alive in what she was doing. And little by little, her behavior began to change with her thoughts. She started learning, reading, experimenting, and tending to a small, growing space at home, as if her real life had already started to arrive. A few months later, life itself pushed her toward change. Layoffs began at work. But instead of the panic she would once have felt, she experienced something closer to release. In time, she used her savings to invest in a piece of land, began working seriously with that space, and step by step moved into the life that had once seemed inappropriate, unrealistic, or impossible for someone like her. Not everyone around her understood it right away, but by then, that no longer held the same power over her. And what this made unmistakably clear was something simple. The sieve of true desires exists so that a person does not spend a lifetime living someone else's version of a meaningful life. You can achieve a great deal of what others expect from you and still never feel truly alive inside it. That is why it matters so much to filter out what is false. Sometimes only 2 words remain, but if those 2 words carry your real love and your real truth, they can become the turning point for your entire life. The 5th practice is respect for money. One of the most destructive financial programs a person can carry is the quiet belief that they are not truly worthy of real prosperity. They may work hard, carry a heavy load, understand business well, and keep trying to move forward. But if a deep habit of scarcity is still living inside them, their efforts seem to leak away. The subconscious starts working like an invisible limiter. The moment life begins to bring in a little more, it finds a way to return that person to the familiar state of lack, because lack feels known, predictable, and psychologically safe. The point of this practice is to stop relating to money as something dirty, dangerous, shameful, or temporary. Prosperity does not ask to be worshipped. It asks to be respected. It rarely stays where it is met with carelessness, guilt, anxiety, or inner distrust. And that is why the issue is not only how much you have, it is also how you treat what has already entered your life. A lot of people reinforce the program of scarcity through very ordinary habits. They keep money in disorder, they crumple bills, they throw receipts, invoices, and financial notes into the same pile. They speak about themselves as if poverty is part of their identity. They complain constantly about money, and when larger sums appear, they feel tension instead of steadiness. These things may look small from the outside, but together they create a very clear inner signal. I am not ready for more. I do not feel comfortable around prosperity. Limitation is what feels familiar to me. This practice begins with order and inner discipline. When a person learns to treat even their current resources with care, they send the subconscious a different message. I can hold, value, and grow what I receive. And this is not only about money itself, it is also about the way a person thinks about well-being, the way they speak about it, and the place they allow it to occupy in their life. I knew a man named Daniel. He was intelligent, hardworking, and genuinely skilled in trade, but he lived as if collapse was always just around the corner. Every time things began to stabilize, something would go wrong. Unexpected expenses, poor decisions, strange losses, confusion in the numbers. From the outside, it looked like chronic bad luck. But underneath it, there was something deeper. Daniel himself did not believe he was capable of living in stable prosperity. You could see it in everything. He would shrink around confident people. He lowered his prices too quickly. He avoided firmness in negotiation. And whenever real profit came in, he found a way to get rid of it, almost as if money itself made him uneasy. One day I saw him throwing receipts and notes together in frustration. And in that moment, the real pattern stood out. He was behaving as if his own prosperity was a source of stress, not a source of support. That was where his practice began. He started bringing order into his financial life. In the evenings, he would calmly sort his money and papers. He stopped handling them in a state of irritation and rush. For a few minutes before sleep, instead of feeding anxiety, he practiced gratitude and inner dignity. He chose 2 words for himself, dignity and abundance, and began tying them not to fantasy, but to a real inner sense of steadiness, order, and self-respect. At first, this felt unnatural to him. Everything inside resisted. The old voice kept saying it was pointless to do this when there were unpaid bills, risks, and unresolved problems. But Daniel stayed with it, and slowly, not only his mood began to shift, but his behavior. There was more composure in the way he handled decisions, more confidence in the way he spoke, more self-respect in the way he priced his work and carried himself in business. Over time, that change became visible from the outside too. Different kinds of clients began to appear. The tone of his conversations changed. The old nervousness started to leave him. And eventually, a genuinely strong opportunity came his way. For the first time, he did not step back from it, apologize for himself, or devalue what he offered. He named a fair price with calm confidence, and the outcome gave him more than temporary relief. It gave him a chance to strengthen his work in a real and lasting way. That experience showed something important very clearly. As long as a person feels unworthy of prosperity, they create barriers against it with their own behavior. But the moment the subconscious begins to accept a program of respect, something larger starts to shift. It is not only the relationship with money that changes. The whole pattern of conduct begins to change with it, and as that pattern changes, reality begins to reorganize around it. Prosperity tends to remain where it is given form, order, dignity, and the inner permission to stay. The 6th practice is the clean threshold. One of the biggest problems in adult life is that people forget how to separate the noise of the outside world from their inner space. They come home, but mentally they are still inside the arguments, the unfinished tasks, the pressure, the demands, and the long list of everything that did not get done. A person crosses the doorway, yet never really leaves the momentum of the day. And that inner clutter matters more than most people realize because it keeps them from feeling that they are allowed to have peace, silence, rest, and a different kind of reality that is not built out of exhaustion. This practice exists to help you consciously end the day instead of dragging it with you into the hours that should restore you. Before sleep, your subconscious works with whatever material you leave in its hands. If the last stretch of the day is filled with tension, irritation, other people's problems, and mental overload, then that is exactly what your inner world keeps processing through the night. And when that happens over and over, tomorrow begins to take shape out of the same emotional residue as yesterday. That is why the clean threshold matters. A threshold is not only a physical doorway, it is a psychological line, a private border, a point of transition between one state of being and another. When you pause before entering your home, even for a minute, you are doing something much deeper than stopping at a door. You are deciding that what happened outside does not have to come inside with you. You are deciding that irritation, fear, unfinished conflict, pressure, and the emotional noise of the day do not get to cross into the space where your nervous system is supposed to recover. This becomes especially important before sleep. If your inner world is still crowded with the debris of the day, even the right words, the right intentions, and the right practices will struggle to take root. They will sink into leftover noise. But when a person enters the evening with less inner clutter, the subconscious receives a very different signal. The fight is over for now. Survival mode is not required. Something deeper can begin. A man named Benjamin comes to mind here. He owned a small printing business and was genuinely sharp, capable, and hardworking. But he lived as if everything around him was always on fire. He came home late, gray with fatigue, and even while sitting at dinner, he was still mentally at work, replaying supplier issues, calculating losses, anticipating the next problem, and carrying the whole day in his body like a weight he did not know how to put down. He had convinced himself that he had no right to relax. If he slowed down for even a moment, everything would collapse. So his home slowly stopped feeling like a place of strength and became little more than a charging station before the next round of pressure. His subconscious was so overloaded that at night it was no longer searching for insight or direction. It was simply replaying stress. So I suggested something simple. Every evening before opening the door, he was to stop for a few minutes and imagine taking a heavy bag off his shoulders. In that bag were all the problems of the day: orders, delays, mistakes, unpaid bills, frustration, pressure, fear. He was not supposed to solve any of it in that moment, not deny it, not argue with it, just not carry it across the threshold. At first, the whole thing felt foolish to him, but by then his exhaustion was so deep that he was willing to try. The first few days, very little seemed to happen, but after about a week, he noticed something real. The moment he paused and imagined setting that weight down, some of the tension in his body actually began to release. He reached for his phone less. He was more present at home. For the first time in a long while, he was not only physically in the house, he was actually there. And once there was less inner noise, something else began to happen. He started seeing solutions that had been buried under constant pressure. The atmosphere at home changed first. Then his work began to change too. Benjamin became calmer, more precise, more deliberate. He found ways to improve the way his shop operated, and the business started growing not out of panic, but out of clarity. That is when something important became impossible to miss. A person is not running away from problems by leaving them at the threshold for the night. They are restoring the clarity without which those problems cannot be handled well at all. The clean threshold is not avoidance. It is mental and emotional hygiene. It is a way of refusing to carry the dirt of the day into the place where recovery is supposed to happen. And the cleaner that inner space becomes before sleep, the more powerfully everything else can work. The seventh practice is mirror approval. One of the quietest tragedies of adult life is that people get used to looking in the mirror not to truly see themselves, but to search for flaws. They notice the tiredness, the lines, the tension, the signs of age, the evidence of strain, and without even realizing it, they repeat the same old message inside: I am not enough. I am not worthy of more. I should not expect too much from life. When those thoughts are repeated for years, they stop sounding like passing moods and start becoming a stable instruction for the subconscious. That is why this practice matters. The point is to use your reflection not for another round of self-judgment, but for inner approval. When a person looks directly into their own eyes and deliberately speaks words of acceptance, strength, and respect, they begin changing the deep inner image they have been carrying for years. This is not surface-level motivation. It is not pretending to be confident. It is direct work with the version of yourself that your subconscious keeps confirming every day. And this practice becomes especially powerful before sleep, when the resistance of the conscious mind softens. In those minutes, eye contact with your own reflection becomes more than a gesture. It becomes a way of delivering a new instruction to the deeper mind. Not an instruction for shame, struggle, and smallness, but one for dignity, strength, and the right to take up space. Over time, a person stops looking for proof that they are inadequate and begins strengthening a different identity instead, the identity of someone who can stand on their own inner foundation. There was a man named Samuel I still remember clearly. He worked as a bookkeeper in a small shop, and he moved through life like someone trying not to be noticed. His head was always slightly lowered. He avoided direct eye contact. He spoke quietly, almost apologetically, as if he were sorry for taking up any room at all. And inside him lived an old sentence he had carried since childhood, the idea that nothing would ever come of him. That belief had gone so deep that even the mirror had become uncomfortable for him. He would glance at himself quickly, then look away, almost irritated by his own reflection. He got sick often. He tired easily. He expected disappointment before anything had even happened. Everything in him seemed organized around one invisible rule: do not hope for respect, do not expect prosperity, do not believe that life has anything larger for you. Then one day, a simple recommendation entered his life. Every evening, before going to bed, he was to look into his own eyes for a few minutes and repeat 2 words that would become a new point of inner support. He chose dignity and strength. At first, it was extremely difficult. After only a few seconds, he wanted to look away. The old resistance rose immediately. It was as if the whole previous program was trying to prevent him from seeing anything valuable in himself. But Samuel kept going. Day after day, he trained himself not to turn away, to keep looking, to stop fleeing from his own face, to stop reinforcing the old inner hostility he had lived with for so long. And little by little, something began to shift. His gaze became steadier, his voice became firmer. He no longer carried himself like someone who had already agreed to play a minor role in his own life. And before long, that change became visible to other people too. He began showing more confidence at work. For the first time in years, he spoke up with useful ideas he would once have kept to himself. And this time, people listened. He stopped being treated like background furniture. As his inner stance changed, his outer place in the world began to change with it. What this shows is something deeply important. If a person never gives themselves inner approval, it becomes very hard for them to truly receive success, respect, or new opportunity. The subconscious follows the identity you keep reinforcing. If you keep seeing yourself as weak, small, or secondary, that becomes the emotional reality you keep recreating. But if you begin learning how to see yourself with dignity, steadiness, and inner recognition, then over time not only your self-image changes, your behavior changes, your presence changes, and eventually your path begins to change too. Mirror approval is not about vanity. It is about restoring your right to be a full participant in your own life. Sometimes a person needs only a few honest minutes of looking at themselves without rejection in order to begin stepping out of an old role, the role where they were too small, too guilty, too hesitant, and too invisible for far too long. The main idea is this: your subconscious is one of the most powerful inner forces shaping the reality you live in, and it becomes especially influential in those few minutes before sleep. When your usual mental control begins to fade, your inner critic quiets down, and whatever you keep feeling, repeating, and holding inside starts sinking deeper and taking root. You were not born for inner smallness, for constant lack, or for a life built around endless struggle and self-restriction. Most of the time, those things are not the truth. They are old beliefs, old fears, old inner programs that settled in long ago and slowly started to feel natural. But any program can be changed if a person becomes more conscious of what they keep feeding their mind every day, and especially of what they carry into themselves before sleep. The most important thing is to truly understand that you are worthy of more than survival. You are worthy of a full life, worthy of inner peace, clarity, strength, self-respect, health, stability, and a future that is not built on shrinking yourself just to get through the day. Your future is shaped in large part by the thoughts, emotions, and inner instructions you leave inside yourself tonight. Over time, those become tomorrow's reactions, decisions, actions, and eventually the direction of your whole life. We've gone through 7 practices, from clearing the heart to mirror approval, and each of them, in its own way, helps a person return to inner stability, clarity, dignity, and a more mature relationship with life. This is not about magic, and it is not about pretty words. It is about the fact that the outer world often begins to change after a person stops betraying and dismissing what is happening inside. The conclusion is simple. If you want your life to begin changing, start with those few minutes before sleep. The minutes most people pass through without awareness. A great deal begins there. Future reactions, future choices, future states of mind, future direction. And the person who learns to become more conscious in those moments gradually gains much more influence over the shape of their life. If this video gave you something valuable, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to, tell me in the comments which of these practices stayed with you the most. Until next time.